Hello, DM here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Go for the Eyes, answering that age-old question, what does happen if you stab a beholder in the eye? Go for the Eyes by Alex Klippinger is on sale in the DM's Guild for $2.95 right now. It's a really great little supplement that answers the question, what happens if I try to cut that beholder's eye stalk off? It's a question that I've been asked multiple times in my DM career. Every time some player comes up against some creature that has multiple heads, multiple eyes, wings, talons, or breath weapons, they're always trying to, how do I disable this thing that it can do? How can I stop it from being more dangerous than it already is? And this gives a good answer for a lot of those questions. Now, it doesn't do it in a generic way, which I think is actually better in this case. The way it does it is, for example, you have a beholder, and a beholder has a central eye and a bunch of eye stalks. Now, a player can decide to take out the central eye. They can either try to disable it, or they can try and destroy it. Now, if they disable it, it closes temporarily, the beholder has disadvantage on its perception checks, and it basically fires an eye stalk back at you as soon as that happens as its reaction. The other instance is where you disable it, and it releases a torrent of magical energy at whatever it destroyed hits a magical eye, if it happens to be like right in front of it. So there's a lot of good risk versus reward thing, and a lot of the other creatures that are mentioned here have that same kind of thing. If you do something to this creature in this way, it will do this instead. And it will change the dynamic of the battle, meaning there's more flavor there, meaning the combat is more interesting for your players. I really like the way that this is done. It's not done in a way that is generic, which I think would have kind of lessened some of the things. And there is a lot here. There is also a lot of different monsters here. While the supplement itself is 25 pages long, you're still getting a good amount of monsters. And the monsters you're getting tend to be the ones a lot of DMs use for their big bads or their big fancy, party piece encounters. Things like beholders, angels, demons, the astral dreadnought is mentioned here. And so just some really cool, interesting monsters. The Yugoloths are also mentioned as well, and the devils and dragons. It's just nice to have those kind of like big party piece monsters, and here's some things you can do to make the fights more interesting and more varied. What did I like about this? I really like the concept. The core concept is brilliant. Giving players more options in combat so that they can do different things, that can exploit weaknesses, kind of harkens a little bit back to some of the 4E mechanics where you were talking about each monster and individual thing had a kind of weakness. It was almost a bit like a Pokemon game where you had all these different like elemental wheels and everything had a weakness or some kind of trait you could exploit to make it a little weaker. And that's like a nice thing to have for certain cases. You don't want it across the entire school of monsters. You want it at very specific points. Like for instance, there are very few creatures with weaknesses in the monster manual overall, and they're very specific. And they tend to be things like the undead tend to have a lot of have certain weaknesses specific to them. Like for instance, vampires have weaknesses to sunlight. This kind of goes a little deeper and says, well, there are obvious points in this creature's physiology that mean that they have certain weaknesses or traits that trigger on various conditions. So for instance, it's not just a case of weaknesses. If its bounded target is hurt, it might fly into a rage because of that. And that's not in the Grey Render stats, but it is something that kind of feels thematically missing from the Grey Render. It's nice to have. The beholder is really nice because there are all these little tiny eye stalks that basically float on what is about the size of, like about that big around. That's pretty easy to cut off if I'm really honest. So it kind of makes sense that a player or even a character would think, yeah, I can chop that thing off. I can get that. I've got a big sword. I can manage that. It's going to dodge, yeah, because it's small, but I can maybe manage it. So it's kind of bridging that gap of believability that I think sometimes certain D&D monsters lack. It's nice to have that. Not just a case that where you cut the eyes out and they're blind. It's a case if you cut a beholder's eye out, if it's the central eye, it explodes with magical energy. That's a nice touch because it makes more thematic sense. It kind of ties everything nicely together. It gives a good understanding for a lot of players. They go, wow, that was really cool. He stabbed the beholder in the eye and exploded, and it actually managed to, kill it, and we stopped getting the anti-magic field, and he saved the wizard. Those kinds of actions help build stories, and this is a very good example of how to bridge those kinds of things. It's the question that always gets asked in a lot of my games is, can I do this, this, or this? And I have to go, well, I have to homebrew something up on the fly, or say no, or say, well, yes, but we'll see what the role is. And they never kind of get that transparency. It's like, is this actually possible, or is he just saying to roll for no reason? What didn't I like about this? Well, there's only one thing, really, and that's the fact that there's not enough here. Now, that's a minor criticism because I would have really loved to see things like giants here. And it's the one creature I would have really loved to see. And it's a case of that it's a nice, tall, scary monster that kind of gives you a good humanoid type without breaking too much of everything else. Like it's not a dragon, so it can't fly, but it can have evil machinations that mean it's a good villain. It's a good final villain. So it would have been nice to have those things kind of included as part of the supplement because they tend to be used in that way. Everything else is great. I really love this supplement. Finally, on to my rating. I really love this supplement. I really love the way it's presented. I really love how simple it is. There's a case of if as a player you want to know if a particular creature has a weakness, there's a DC to meet for any of the specific knowledge. It explains which ones are which. So if you're Arcana, you have the aberrations creatures created by magic and like things like golems and planar creatures. If you're Nature, you're thinking beasts and monstrosities. If you think religion, things like fiends, celestials, undead, and then kind of there are bits where they're crossover, things like that. And then history could potentially be used in any of them. But the point is that each of these DCs is listed with the monster type. And if you're running one of the monsters that's listed here, these tend to be like final boss or dangerous encounters that you've probably done enough prep for, where reading this or including this as part of it isn't that much of a stretch, which means it's easier to do. And it makes the fights more interesting, because if you just throw a single beholder at a party, all it's going to do is just every so often just throw an eye ray out. It's going to throw an eye ray out every legendary action, and it's going to throw a couple of eye rays out on its turn. And that's it. It's not going to do anything more interesting than that. It's just going to do. And the random nature of its eye rays might be a little fun for time. But if a player can, say, whack off an eye stalk and stop that from happening, it means it adds a little bit of a strategy element into the game itself. Instead of just, wait, can we outlive this thing? Can we HP grind this thing into the dust? Instead of a strategy system where you've kind of got to think more about how you fight this thing. Do you take off an eye stalk? Do you risk it? What's going to happen if you do? Do you take out the central eye? Do you leave it there? All of that kind of stuff is possible here. And it's why I really like the supplement. And I have very little minor criticisms, which are only, there's not enough here. So I have to give it a 5 out of 5. So thank you for your time. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And do remember to use my affiliate code. Thank you, and peace out.